The Trial of God is a play by Romanian-born Holocaust survivor Elie Wiesel. Set in 1649, it recounts the arrival of three pious and learned rabbis into the imaginary city of Shamgorod. Here they are told that the Jewish population of the city has recently been massacred in a pogrom. The rabbis respond by putting God in the dock. Evidence is gathered, witnesses are heard, and conclusions drawn. The end result is a unanimous condemnation of the Lord Almighty as guilty of crimes against humanity. Yet the play has a twist. As the final act draws to a close, the protagonists realize that evening is falling, and so they cease venting at God and say their prayers. Despite it all, something of faith and hope remains. Wiesel described this play of his as a tragic farce. Maybe it needed to be comic in order to plumb the depths of the persecutions which he and his companions suffered at the hands of the Nazis, and which countless other minorities have endured across the blood-spattered pages of history. Tonight's first reading attempts something similar to Wiesel's play. The third chapter of the prophet Daniel offers an imaginary retrospection into the Babylon of the 6th century BC, a land of exile, in order to lay bare the irreconcilable pressures that were being faced by the people of God 4 centuries later. The context of Daniel, in the form that we know it, is the year 167 BC, when Hellenistic despot Antiochus IV desecrated the temple in Jerusalem, subverting Jewish worship and setting up a statue to himself. How could God's people remain faithful in the face of such sacrilege imposed by state violence? And one response was to document their feelings in the collation of stories that we now know as the book Daniel. And here in chapter 3, we learn of the massive idol put up by King Nebuchadnezzar. Was it a statue of the king or of his principal deity, Marduk? Perhaps deliberately, Daniel does not tell us. For victimized minorities, the gods, kings, and nation of their oppressors are all entwined as part of a single totalitarian regime. Daniel 3 then moves from tragedy to farce, turning to recite a pantomime about civil servants commanded to worship that idolistic statue in response to repeated orchestral promptings. Thus, verse 2, King Nebuchadnezzar sent for the satraps, the prefects, and the governors, the councillors, the treasurers, the justices, the magistrates, and all the officials of the provinces. It's like a Gilbert and Sullivan play. Ordering them, verse 4, to bow down when they hear the sound of the horn, the pipe, the lyre, the trigon, the harp, the drum, and the entire musical ensemble. Yet Jewish readers would have recognized none of those instruments in the context of their worship. All were foreign terms for musical instruments used in a secular context. And so the farce is exposed as a facade. And in time we get to the condemnation of the three friends of the eponymous Daniel, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, with a mortal dilemma. Should they apostatize their beliefs or endure agonizing incineration? The response is immediate and unwavering. They know, verse 17, that if their faith is true, then God has the power to deliver them from any ordeal. Nonetheless, verse 18, they acknowledge that such a God, in his sovereignty, might not choose a path of redemptive intervention. So in solidarity with countless martyrs down the ages, they are realistic about their fate. Even if God will not deliver us, quote, "Be it known to you, O King, that we will not serve your gods, and we will not worship the golden statue that you have set up." The implicit challenge facing the three friends is the same as we read in the Old Testament book of Job. Should believers only honor God because of the blessings which he gives us in the good times? God may be trusted to protect us, but our honoring of God is not conditional on his preserving us from every malady and misfortune. And so Christians recognize no other God but God, come what may. In the face of this confession, human potentates are ultimately frustrated and defeated. Whether their victims escape the flames, as in Daniel chapter 3, or whether they do not, as in an equivalent tribulation in the second book of Maccabees chapter 7. In the narrative of Daniel 3, Nebuchadnezzar is given the chance to acknowledge his error through a vision of our unsinged heroes within his crematorium. The king says in verse 25, "I see 4 men unbound, walking in the middle of the fire, and they are not hurt, and the 4th has the appearance of a god." To the author of Daniel, that 4th figure seems an anonymous mystery. To the Christian, he might appear potentially familiar. Here is a rescuer who saves victims not from the fire, but in the fire and through the fire. The crucified Jesus contends alongside the suffering in every age. Friends, we hope never to be faced with the dilemma of conscience which confronted Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Nonetheless, our world still knows megalomaniac demagogues like Nebuchadnezzar. Some of them are even democratically elected. And our world knows too the equivalent of the fiery furnace, traumas and tragedies beyond our control which happen in the course of world affairs, institutional life and personal circumstance. Furnaces which rage bright in the face of faith and justice. A few are devastatingly literal. Egregious examples are the effects of poor building construction and management. One is global, the delicate climactic equilibrium against which leaders seek to roll back international commitments to carbon reduction to the peril of their grandchildren. Some are metaphorical, including the historic tendency of institutions recently highlighted to preserve their own interests above those of the most vulnerable, charged to their care. and many are personal. Tragedies which beset communities, families and individuals, some doubtless being experienced by those within this room tonight. At the centre of each of these furnaces, whether recognised or not by the latter-day Nebuchadnezzars, the crucified Jesus stands with and alongside the suffering. So history and theology advise that flawed humans keep slipping up. 6 steps forward, then half a dozen back. Nonetheless, flawed humans can and must strive and pray for better, even for best. And through grace, we know the one who contends alongside us.